This podcast is produced by the Harwood Productions Podcast Network. To learn more about the network and to find more of our shows, visit us online at www.harwoodpodcast.com.
Hi, it's Cindy Harris, and today I'm taking an old-fashioned American spice cake and I'm updating it with a little orange frosting and making it into a cupcake. So we first start by getting our muffin pan out and going ahead and putting in 12 cupcake liners. Now I want the spices in this cake to really be pronounced, so I'm going to bloom them, which means putting them dry into some warm butter as opposed to just into the flour mixture. So how I do this, I take 2 tablespoons of butter and I melt that in the microwave for about 30 seconds. Then I'm going to put in 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of allspice, 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves, 1/4 teaspoon of ginger, and then 1/8 teaspoon of ground fresh nutmeg. And then I'm just going to give this a little stir, and those spices are now starting to have their flavors intensify because they're in that warm oil. So that's really going to make the flavor stand out in this cake. Now let's get our dry ingredients together. So in a small bowl, I'm just going to measure out 1 cup of flour and then 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder and 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda and then 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And then I'm just going to mix these together. Then over at the mixer, I'm going to take the rest of my butter, which was 6 tablespoons, and I did not soften my butter, so I cut it up in little cubes, which I find works just as well as if you had remembered to soften your butter for a couple of hours. So I'm just going to take the cubed 6 tablespoons of butter, put them in my mixer, and I'm going to get them to start creaming. And then I'm going to take a cup of sugar and I'm going to add that. And then I'm also, to get this sort of darker color in the cupcake that I want that shows it's a real spice cake, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of dark molasses. And then I'm just going to let those ingredients mix together. Then off in a small bowl, I'm going to go ahead and crack 3 eggs, and I always crack it first in a small bowl and move it over to a larger bowl so that in case any shell gets in there, it doesn't wreck my batter. And then to the eggs, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Now the butter and sugar and molasses is looking nice and fluffy, so then I'm going to go ahead and get my melted butter with the spices, and look at how thick that's gotten and how dark, which is just great. I'm going to put that into the mixing bowl. Let that start mixing around, and then I'm going to start dropping the eggs. And it's real important when you get the eggs in that they really get well mixed into the batter before we go to the next step. And once the eggs are mixed in, we're going to stop the mixer and I'm going to get the flour and I'm going to put about half of the flour into the bowl. Then I'm going to let the mixer go for just a couple of seconds, just till the flour starts to mix in a little bit. And then I'm going to get a 1/2 cup of buttermilk and I'm going to put about half of that in. And that's going to really start making it come together. Then I'm going to stop, put the rest of the flour in. Then I'm going to let that mix up again just for a couple of seconds, and then I'm going to put the rest of the buttermilk. Now I want a tender cake, so I don't want to overbeat this. So once this all comes together like this, we stop the machine, bring it over, and use your spatula and give it a final stir. Now it's time to go ahead and fill our cupcake liners. Now I always like to go through with a cookie scoop and just put, and this is a medium-sized scoop, put 1 scoop in each cupcake holder. And then once I've got each cupcake holder having some batter. Then I go back and I start to fill the rest of them up with another scoop. That way, by the time you're done, each cup is about 3/4 of the way full, and everything will bake nice and evenly. Then we're going to put these into a 350-degree oven, and they're going to bake for about 20 minutes. And when they come out, they're going to look nice and golden, just like this. But I always like to check and make sure that they're cooked all the way through. So grab a toothpick and put it right in the center of one of the cakes. And if it comes out clean, then it's cooked all the way through. Then I just like to let the pan sit for about 5 minutes. And as they're cooling, you're going to start to see they shrink away from the sides, but sometimes they get caught a little bit as they've baked. So I take a sharp knife and I just run it around the edge. And then after the 5 minutes is done, then it's safe to go ahead and transfer them off onto a cooling rack. And to do that, I just get a little fork and I kind of pry them out, and they just sit in on the cooling rack. Now, these cupcakes have to totally cool before we can ice them. So what I do is I wait until the cupcakes are totally cold, and then that way when I put the frosting on, they look beautiful. Now we're going to start by making a traditional cream cheese frosting. So I'm going to take 5 tablespoons of butter. Again, I haven't softened it, so I've cubed it up. And I'm using my whisk attachment to start breaking that up. Then I'm going to take 1 1/4 cups of powdered sugar. Now you'll notice I have not sifted this, and I have found that if you use the whisk attachment, you don't need to. But as it starts blending, notice it looks really dry and crumbly, but if you let it keep going, the butter starts to absorb more and more of that powdered sugar. Now we're going to add our cream cheese. I've got an 8-ounce block. I'm just using a light cream cheese, but you can use whatever you like. Go ahead, put that in and get that creaming up. And then once that comes together, we can go ahead and start putting some of our flavoring in. Now, traditionally, you put in a teaspoon of vanilla, so we're going to do that. But I thought it would taste good to add a little orange zest to this one. So what I've taken is just 1 orange. I'm using my microplaner and running it across the top of the orange so that it all collects on the top of the microplaner. And then I'm just going to go ahead and scrape that right into the bowl. And then a final mix up, and then this frosting is ready to go. Now, cream cheese frosting is a really easy frosting to work with. So just put on a nice amount on the top of the cake. I always like to leave a little border of the cake so that you can see what color it is, so it just doesn't look like a pile of frosting. And the only other thing with these cupcakes that you need to remember is the frosting is mainly cream cheese, which you need to refrigerate. So once you get these frosted, you can leave them out for, half an hour or so, but then they do need to go into the refrigerator, and then just let them set out for about 15 minutes before you serve them. Now, another trick I've found with cupcakes like this, I go ahead and put them on the rack like this in the freezer and let them freeze overnight, and then I wrap them in saran individually, and then you can have a delicious spice cupcake whenever you want. Now, if you want to get the recipe, just go to our website, visit the Cupcake show notes. I'll have the recipe there for you. Don't forget to sign up for our monthly newsletter. We put out about 42 original shows every month, and if you want to stay in the loop, you need to sign up for it, and I'll make sure you get a copy. And of course, if you have any questions, send me an email. I'll see you next time.